Frank Forrester Church IV came to All Souls in September of 1978. The thinking of the search committee is recalled by Mary Ella Holst, All Souls member for almost 35 years.
They wanted someone to lead us into the next generation. They did not feel that the new minister, whoever he or she might be, had to reflect themselves. They wanted somebody who would know what the new issues were, what was important. They wanted someone who was going to move the congregation. That was a very risky, but I think a very courageous decision. And in that regard, Forrest was the perfect match.
And I had absolutely complete confidence that I would never go into the ministry. This was not something that I was interested in. I was going to go into a teaching career.
No, it ain't me, babe. It ain't me you're looking for, babe.
When Forrest was first invited for an interview at All Souls, he said no, but then he reconsidered.
Halfway through that interview, with this extraordinary group of 7 people, I realized that everything I had been thinking of before that moment was now history to me. What I wanted to do was serve this congregation, come to New York City, and be a parish minister. I had a conversion experience during that interview, and then I left saying, oh my goodness, this is what I want to do, and I'm only 29 and I don't know how to do it.
Perhaps he's sensitive, but I don't think the congregation felt as bad as he did. It is true that the president of the board did go to him and encourage him to focus more, on his sermons.
When I came to All Souls, the good thing is that I had no idea how incompetent or ignorant I was. So I entered into it with great elan and confidence. Had I known what I know now, needed to be known back then, knowing so little back then, I think I would have been paralyzed.
My first impressions of Forrest were his tremendous energy and enthusiasm. He looked like a young Abraham Lincoln. He was tall, he was very thin, and he sort of went off in 3 directions at once. He was just so enthusiastic about being here. It was very hard to keep up with him.
Christina Bellamy, former president of the congregation and All Souls member for 14 years, remembers the first time she met Forrest.
As I approached the outside of the church, I saw this young minister in this sort of kind of ruby robe, just greeting people with this huge handshake and slapping his arm around them and hi, this. And I truly tried to avoid him. I thought I could slide into the church. And when he spotted me, he literally came loping from one side of the staircase over to where I was and reached out his hand and, hi, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. My name is Forrest Church. I'm the minister here. And what's your name?
Christina says she visited many churches and had never been received the way she was that day at All Souls.
I was excited. I was excited about the people. I was excited about the community. I was excited about the beauty of the church. And I was most excited about this young, dynamic minister, which to me was most exciting. And needless to say, here I am. I've been coming ever since.
Forrest Church was born in Boise, Idaho on September 23, 1948, to Frank Forrester Church III and Bethune Clark Church, daughter of Chase Clark, former governor of Idaho.
I guess I grew up in a secular humanist household. My father was a renegade Catholic. He left the Catholic Church when he was about 14. My mother was an ice cream social Presbyterian. She took us to church on state occasions. Sometimes my father needed to be seen in church, I suppose. So I didn't have a religion to reject. And because of that, throughout my life, I think that I've tended to move toward believing more and more rather than having to back off from beliefs and regroup.
Forrest's first religious stirrings occurred when his father gave him the Jefferson Bible, which was presented to him upon his swearing in the Senate. Thomas Jefferson constructed his Bible in 1803 while he was in the White House. He literally cut up the Gospels, removing the sections he didn't believe in. Jefferson took out all of the miracles, but left in the ethical teachings.
That kind of Jeffersonian, it's in your life and not in your words that your religion must be read notion, has always, the deeds not creeds notion has always been, though we can't always attain to, the highest form of it, been the fundament of my own faith.
At the end of his years at Stanford, Forrest was accepted into law school and divinity school. He contemplated both, but the decision ultimately wasn't that difficult. None of the courses in law school interested him.
Every course, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, all this neat stuff at the divinity school interested me. And so I really went in with the passion for the life and death existential issues that were raised in the study of religion. I believed in believers, I believed in belief, but I didn't believe in God.
I think that his first focus was, what is a church? What is a congregation? And to that degree, it was very experiential. And I believe that in some ways the congregation, the back and forth between the congregation and himself had a good deal in shaping his subsequent theology.
The way my theology developed was that I was afraid of the word God when I came to All Souls. I'm not sure I used it more than 2 or 3 times in preaching. Every time I used the word God, I had in my mind Jimmy Swaggart's God or Billy Graham's God, and the God was too small, and I didn't believe in that God, and I felt like I was doing something false. And then over time, I began to discover that the God I disbelieved in was too small, and I had to suspend my disbelief, and I had to stop using their definitions, and I had to encounter something at a higher level. God is just the biggest word we know. It's a pointer at that which is greater than all and present in each. And for me, that discovery of a God beyond a God beyond a God, almost in a Paul Tillich sense, was absolutely liberating. Religion has 2 dimensions. Awe, which is a sense of, oh my goodness, this is incredible. And humility, saying, oh my goodness, I don't know anything. Anyone who says that he or she knows that God exists and can explain that, or says that he or she knows that God doesn't exist and can explain that, is missing in the humility component. Anyone who thinks that none of this is important is missing in the awe component. And so for me, my theology has developed as the humility has grown deeper to the extent that I can aspire toward it or match it. The awe has just grown spectacularly. And I mean, I really can't believe that we're here and that we can speak and talk and hear and listen and do and fail and recover. I mean, this is just incredibly great. And that is the religious power and passion that impels me.
Forrest has been struggling with his ministry and with his religion, and that's an inspiration to me, and I love him for it. I really do. There aren't a lot of people who speak out of their heart. Forrest doesn't preach. Forrest speaks, but he speaks out of his own experience. And to me, that's what it's all about.
I don't think I became a minister, however, until the first death in the congregation. That's when I began to discover what now is my definition of religion, that religion is our human response to the dual reality of being alive and having to die. We're not the animal with tools or the animal with advanced language. We're the religious animal because we know we're going to die and therefore need to question what life means. It was only being with people at that time of extremis, whether they were dying or had just lost a loved one, that the whole importance, almost the sacrament of this calling became clear to me.
I asked Galen Gingrich what the last 5 years have been like for him in terms of working with Forrest.
They have been extraordinary. I think when Forrest and I first met, we couldn't imagine that a collaboration of this sort would work so well, both theologically and institutionally. It's been a lot of fun, in part because Forrest isn't a command and control senior minister, which is actually rather unusual as senior ministers go. Forrest is more an invitation and celebration kind of leader. He invites people around him, colleagues, members of the congregation, to come forward, explore their own strengths and abilities, and then celebrates the outcome.
I asked Mariella what she thought Forrest's greatest strength is as a minister.
His deep listening. I think that people don't understand. People from the outside do not understand his pastoral skills. People see him as a public figure. But those people who have experienced him as in the traditional pastoral role, I think have a depth of appreciation for him that is very bonding.
When Forrest is talking to you, he's talking to you. He's not talking to anybody else in the room, he's talking to you. And when he hears a problem that you have, whatever it may be, Forrest takes it very personally. He really takes it personally. I can speak for myself, especially. And that, to me, is really a source of strength.
I suppose I'm most proud of not the growth of the congregation, but the growth of the individuals within it and the growth of our ministries here. This really has become a flagship church, not only for being planted here and for being large, but for the model that we have established, particularly in our outreach programs. I think this is a profound model. Each one of these in and of itself is small, but we save the world one neighbor at a time.
And one of the things that I see in Forrest's life and in his ministry, in his writing, is the willingness to do philosophy and theology in the old sense, theology that matters, that makes a difference, that delves into those troubling and troubled parts of our personal and national life, and is willing to suggest ways in which we can think about those issues, we can act with compassion toward each other, we can support each other, both personally and institutionally, even politically.
One of the most exciting things that's happening, and has been happening over the last 20 years within the Unitarian movement, is that we've moved from a negative to an affirmative faith. When I first came to All Souls, a lot of the people who had been here and some of the people who were coming were on the rebound from other faiths. They were here to believe less, as it were, to have a safer ground. What's happening now is that the people are coming mostly from the secular world, perhaps having been raised Catholic or Jewish or Protestant, but really having not taken. They're in the secular world. They recognize that they've got everything and yet nothing. There's no integrating principle. They need a faith. They can't check their minds at the door of another church. They can't sign on a dogmatic dotted line, but they need something more. So they come to All Souls looking for more. And our faith is becoming, and I don't think it's unique here, I think it's happening everywhere in our denomination, an affirmative faith, not an alternative to faith, but an alternative way of being faithful.
Forrest has been the spokesperson for Unitarian Universalism for at least the past decade and maybe longer. He has been the most prominent voice, the most public voice, the most consistent voice, and I think his role in that way has served to provide All Souls with a sense of being something of a model for what churches in our movement can be in terms of our outreach in the community, in terms of our role in the city.
He has just brought the denomination out of the shadows. Now, there are folks who are perfectly happy to keep, you know, we're Yankees. We're those old Puritans up in Boston, you know. Your name appears in the paper when you're born and when you die, and nowhere in between. But the denomination is much larger than that. And Forrest is very popular. People want him to come all over the country and stand up and be a Unitarian Universalist. And when he comes out with his enthusiasm and his intelligence and his take on what's happening in the world and the needs of people, not only themselves, but all people, they are very proud to be Unitarian Universalists.
Part of Forrest's popularity derives from his writings. To date, he is author of 17 books, his latest being Lifelines. For many years, Americans have read about Forrest in countless columns and articles in national publications. And over the years, he's also been a guest commentator on radio and television, one of the country's leading liberal theologians. But in the midst of this stellar career, there have been dark moments.
Well, the great crisis in my ministry was also the great crisis in my life. It was a personal crisis when my marriage broke up, and I was the one who was responsible for that. It was a terrific failure, and I caused great damage to the institution because of how public a divorce this was. It was a divorce and remarriage, as many such things are, but I had a different standard to be held to.
I asked Forrest what he learned from that experience.
The lesson I've learned during that process is how each one of us is truly a sinner, flawed, vulnerable, that we need to we do need, and I've always preached this before, but it was kind of paper preaching as opposed to heart preaching and passion preaching. We need to be able to forgive one another. We need to be shorter on judgment than we are on compassion. And we need to unite with one another in a different way, more as peers and equals and less as in sort of a hierarchy of virtue slash fame.
When I came to All Souls 5 years ago, it had been the previous 5 years had been difficult in a number of ways. And I think the openness that has developed around who we are as a congregation, about how people feel about this institution, about the leadership, has really been a process of healing and of turning the focus to who we are now and in the future. And that's been a significant shift.
The one thing I believe is true of All Souls today that has never been true as fully is that the congregation itself is more powerful than it's ever been before. If you take a look at the fiber of the congregation, there are more people engaged, involved, and creating our ministries than ever before. So if anything, the minister today is less dominant and less important, the congregation more dominant and important, and I think that adds to the health of the institution.
All Souls is as strong as ever. We have a great church school, a wonderful music program, and over 30 outreach programs. We're in the middle of a capital campaign that's going very well. And with the establishment of the Lifeline Center, All Souls will have a much broader impact.
The Lifeline Center is, I think, the most exciting part of what's happening at All Souls as we look to the future. And in my mind, it is simply an attempt to take the fundamental dynamic of All Souls Church and apply it more broadly to people who are not a part of this faith community.
The Lifeline Center will foster connection and interaction around the primary issues that animate our lives. With no political or ideological bias, it will offer programs relating to work, love, society, and spirit in the hope of connecting people with each other for mutual enrichment. We're looking for $300,000 initially to support the center's staff and bring in outstanding scholars and teachers.
The Lifelines Institute is my dream. As we get closer to this, it becomes ever so much more exciting to me. This notion of bringing people together weekly around a given topic having to do with spirituality or love or work or relationships, bringing people together, having them then join together for supper, continue to talk about these things, meet together again the following Sunday if they wish, form an affinity group that will go on and do a dream workshop with one another or work in advocating a certain kind of health care, whatever it happens to be that the group is drawn together. But the key is not the issue. The key is bringing people together in deep ways, in common effort. And I think it's going to be absolutely fabulous for us. And I also think it's going to be a model for other institutions like ours around the country to take community to a new level.
I do not count the time. Who knows where the time goes?
people who've influenced me the most are my father, by his human example as much as by his public example, but certainly the both of those. A couple of mentors whom I never knew, Harry Emerson Fosdick of Riverside and A. Powell Davies of All Souls, who combined a prophetic with a pastoral ministry in a way that I've tried to emulate. And I would have to say my wife Carolyn, who has given me strength and courage and helped to make me be a better person. So I would say those four would be my heroes.
He's been here 20 years, and I'm glad he's been here 20 years, and I hope he's here for another 20 years. I truly believe that Forrest has much to say to us all. I really believe that, and it still is to come.
I believe that Forrest is really, and I do hear people talking about this around his sermons, is that he is just now reaching his prime. I think we are just at the opening of prime time Forrest Church.
Hallelujah.